I didn't start crying when the lawyer read the last page. I didn't even cry when I realized the house, the account, the business, gone. What finally broke me was the way your chair stayed empty, as if you couldn't be bothered to watch what you'd done to my life. Someone I trusted more than anyone turned my whole world into a document, into signatures, into a quiet, legal erasure of everything I thought we were building. Overnight, I lost my security, my plans, the future I practiced saying out loud. I went from a shared life to a stranger staring back at me in the mirror, asking one question. How do you destroy someone who used the law to destroy you? It took me a while to find the answer, but once I did, I never needed to cry again. Before everything fell apart in that lawyer's office, I honestly believed I was a careful person. I grew up in a house where money was counted twice and spent once. My parents weren't poor, but nothing was ever taken for granted. Fees, rent, medical bills. Emergency was always a possibility. Like bad weather, you just had to be ready for. So I became that kind of person. The one who kept receipts. The one who remembered due dates. Sensible. Predictable. I studied commerce because it felt practical. Numbers, ledgers, statements. They calmed me. They gave me the illusion that if you were organized enough, nothing could blindside you. I didn't dream of fireworks. I dreamed of a steady job, a small flat, bills paid on time, maybe someone to split groceries and rent with. Security was romance to me. When I met him, he was the opposite of everything I was, and that's what pulled me in. He was loud where I was quiet, confident where I was cautious. He talked about vision and scale and the next 5 years, while I was still thinking about the next month's budget. He said my practicality was exactly what he needed. I believed him. When we started the business together, it felt like proof we were a team. He handled clients, networking, the big ideas. I handled operations, staff, schedules, suppliers, the mess no one sees but everyone depends on. From the outside, people called it his business. Articles used his name. Clients bragged about knowing him. But inside, day to day, it was both of us. I opened the office most mornings. I locked up last most nights. We set up a joint household account, and at the beginning we'd sit together once a month, going through bank statements and bills. I had my little spreadsheets. He'd laugh and say I should have been an accountant. Back then, if you'd asked me if I trusted him, I would have said yes without thinking. He was my person, my partner, my we. The first changes came packaged as practicality. Let me handle the business accounts, he said one evening, papers spread out on the dining table. You already have 1,000 things on your plate. No point both of us stressing about the same numbers. It sounded reasonable. We agreed to keep one joint account for the house. The main business account would be under his name, for convenience with the bank. We're married, he said, laughing. What's mine is yours anyway. I remember feeling almost silly for wanting to read every form. It was just paperwork. We sat in the bank, and they slid documents across, flagged where to sign. I signed because I trusted the person sitting next to me more than the stranger across the desk. Later, when we started the process of buying an apartment, it was the same. Stacks of documents, legal language, a lawyer he said he trusted. He came home with a blue file, tapped on pages. It's just standard loan stuff, he said. I've gone through it already. If there was anything worrying, I'd tell you. We're finally getting our own place. Just sign, we'll celebrate afterwards. I skimmed, but not really. I was tired. We'd been talking about our home for years. I didn't ask whose name would go where. I just signed wherever he pointed. He kissed my forehead afterwards and said, "Welcome home, partner." I took that sentence at face value. I didn't ask to see the deed. Little things started changing over time. His phone lived face down. Certain calls were always taken outside the room. If I asked about a meeting with the accountant, he'd say, "You'll be bored. It's just technical stuff. I'll fill you in later." If I pushed too much, he'd wrap it in flattery. "You're better with people. I'm better with the numbers. Let's lean into our strengths." I let that become our script. He handled big picture. I handled day to day. It felt like division of labor. It was quietly also division of power. A friend asked me once, over coffee, "So, on paper, how are things? Whose name is on what?" I shrugged. Mostly his. It's just easier that way. We're married. She held my gaze longer than felt comfortable. Just make sure you know what you've signed, she said. That's all. I laughed it off. You make it sound like a crime show. You'd be surprised, she said. I went home and did nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid, that asking to see documents would be an insult, that love meant not treating your husband like a suspect. The first jolt came in the most ordinary place, a supermarket. I tapped my personal card at the checkout, declined, tried again, same result. I used the joint card, smiled it off, wheeled my card out with my heart racing. In the car, I checked my banking app. The balance in my personal account was almost zero. A few recent transfers out, each labeled with our company name and a reference. Float, salaries, settlement. I called the bank. They told me the transfers had been done through my login. I hung up knowing exactly what had happened. He'd used my account as a cushion, maybe from my laptop, maybe with my saved password. Technically, it could look like I'd done it. Practically, I knew I hadn't. That night, I waited until after dinner. Hey, I said, trying to sound light. Next time you move money from my account, can you at least tell me first? My card got declined today. It was awkward. He didn't look up from his phone. Client payment was late. I used it to cover salaries. I was going to tell you. You didn't, I said. He sighed, finally meeting my eyes. We're on the same team. Why are you talking like I robbed you? Because it was my personal savings, I said quietly. And I found out at the counter in front of strangers. I'm out there breaking my back to keep this business alive, he snapped. And you're worried about a few transfers that literally kept people fed. It's not the amount, I said. It's that you didn't ask. He pushed his chair back. Forget it. Next time I'll let everything crash so your card can go through. An hour later, he apologized, said he was stressed, said he'd never hurt me on purpose. I nodded. We went to bed, but something in me had shifted. A tiny, stubborn voice started asking questions I couldn't quite push away. A few weeks later, an email landed in our shared inbox. Annual company information update. Action required. Normally, I would have forwarded it to him. That day, I opened it. There was a link to the government portal. It asked for a login. Underneath was an option for a one-time code to the registered email. I clicked it. The code arrived in that same inbox. I entered it and suddenly I was inside a system I'd never seen before, where my entire professional life was reduced to a few lines on a screen. Company name, registration number, status, active. I went to officers and shareholders. Director, his name. Shareholder, his name, 100%. I frowned. There had to be an error. I scrolled down. Former officers. There, under that heading, was my name. Resigned as director, effective 2 years ago. Transferred shares, 100% to his name. I clicked on the document attached to my name. Resignation as director. Transfer of shares. Date, 2 years back. Witness, our accountant. Near the bottom, in familiar dark blue ink, was my signature. I stared at it until the letters blurred. I tried to place that day, 2 years ago, around the time we'd signed tax documents and restructuring forms at the dining table. I could see it now in fragments, the blue file, his finger tapping where I should sign, his voice saying, "It's just formalities, we'll save on tax." At no point in my memory was there a conversation that began with, "You will no longer own any part of this company," or "You will not be a director anymore," or "On paper, this will be mine alone." And yet, there it was, written in legal language I'd skimmed past, stamped by the government, presented today as a simple fact. I scrolled back to the top of the PDF. I hereby resign as director of the company with immediate effect. I hereby transfer all my shares in the company to his name for the sum of nominal amount, a symbolic amount, a joke sum, nothing close to what the business was actually worth, nothing close to the years I had given it. My hand shook on the mouse. 2 years. For 2 years, I had been working like an owner in a business where, legally, I was nothing. No control, no protection, no stake, not forgotten, not overlooked, removed. By someone who came home every night, ate the food I cooked, slept beside me, and still said, "Our business, our future, our plans." The room went strangely quiet. Even the traffic outside sounded far away. I could hear my own breathing, too fast, too loud. I scrolled up one more time, just to make sure I wasn't misreading. Former officer, my full name, reason, resigned. Effective date, clear as day. The word former sat there, black on white, final and casual at the same time. Former partner, former director, former owner of the life I thought I was building. And for the first time, really for the first time, a single cold thought cut through the noise in my head. This wasn't an accident. He had taken me off everything. And I had helped him do it, one blind signature at a time. I don't know how long I sat there staring at that word. Former. It was like looking at my own death certificate in a system that didn't know it was killing me. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was shame. A deep, hot shame that crawled up my neck and settled in my chest. Because there, at the bottom of the page, was my own hand. My own careful, practiced signature. I had done this. I had helped him erase me. My mind started trying to fix it, rewrite it. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe it was some technical thing. Maybe I was still an owner in spirit, and this was just structure. I scrolled back up, hunting for some hidden reassurance. Instead, I found the first line I'd missed before. Following discussions with the other director, and in order to focus on family and personal commitments, I hereby tender my resignation. Focus on family. I read that sentence 3 times. My eyes burned. There had been no such conversation. I had never said those words to him, or to anyone. I had not chosen to step back. I had been at the office every day. I had been the one staff called when something broke. I had been the one answering emails at midnight. And yet, on paper, it looked like I had walked away, calmly, voluntarily, to focus on family. That was the first twist of the knife. It wasn't just that he'd shut me out. He'd written a story about me that wasn't true, and made it official. A wave of dizziness hit me. Suddenly, the office felt unfamiliar, like I was trespassing in a place I thought I owned. If he could do this with the business, what about everything else? My thoughts jumped to the one thing that had always felt like ours more than anything else. The apartment. Our home. I closed the portal, grabbed my bag, and drove home without really remembering the journey. Once inside, I went straight to the cupboard where we kept all the important files. Insurance, warranties, property papers. The blue property folder was exactly where I'd filed it myself. I sat on the floor and opened it. The title deed was near the front. I scanned down, looking for my name. Owner. His name. Just his. No and, no joint, no sign of me. My heart hammered harder. I flipped pages, sweating. Loan agreement. There were 2 names on that. Borrower. His name. Co-borrower. Guarantor. My full name. I let out a small, ugly laugh that didn't sound like me at all. On paper, the place we called our home was his asset and our debt. He owned it. We owed it. It was such a clean arrangement, so efficient, so invisible when you were just living in it, cooking in the kitchen, folding laundry on the couch. Twist number 2, if everything went well, he had the house. If anything went wrong, I had the liability too. My hands shook as I put the papers back. My head was buzzing. I told myself to breathe, to be logical, to check more before I spiraled. Back at my laptop, I opened the company's shared drive. I'd used it for client files, contracts, reports for years. I had never paid much attention to the admin folder. That had always been his side of things. Now I clicked on it. There was a file named Org Structure and HR Docs. Inside, subfolders. I opened the one with my name, half expecting it to be empty. There was a PDF labeled Employment Agreement, Operations Manager. My throat tightened. I clicked. There it was, my name at the top. Position, Operations Manager. Salary, less than what we actually took home as a couple, but enough to make me look like a mid-level employee. Clause 4. The employee acknowledges she has no claim to ownership, equity, or decision-making rights in the company other than as may be expressly granted in writing by the director. Signed by him, Director. Signed by me, Employee. The date was a few months after my resignation. I remembered that signature too, vaguely. He'd said the bank needed some HR paperwork to show we were properly structured. "You're already doing the job," he'd said. "This is just to formalize things. It will help with loans." Twist 3. On paper, I was not just removed. I had been neatly recategorized, from partner to staff, from builder to hired hand. If I ever questioned my place, there it was, an employment contract quietly telling me I had no rights to the thing I was breaking myself to uphold. My stomach churned. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. How many times had I walked into our office, past a registration certificate with only his name in bold, and not really seen it? How many times had I joked about being married to the business, without realizing, officially, I was just another employee without even a formal email announcing my role? A notification flashed on my screen. A new email in the shared inbox. Automatically, I clicked it. It was from our accountant. Subject: as discussed, updated shareholding and director structure. It was 2 years old. I must have seen it when it arrived and filed it away in my mind as technical stuff. I opened the thread. At the bottom, the original message. Per our meeting, I have attached the updated forms for my name's resignation and transfer of shares. Once signed, will update the registry and bank. Please confirm she understands she will no longer have ownership or director responsibilities. Above it, his reply, yes, she's fully aware. This is her decision. She wants to reduce stress and focus on home. I'll handle things from here. My eyes froze on that line. She's fully aware. This is her decision. That was lie number 1. Then, a second email from the accountant, a few days later. Changes completed. Just a note. You may want to consider a formal employment contract for her if she continues to be involved in operations to keep things clean for tax and liability. His answer, casual. Good idea. She doesn't care about paperwork. As long as the house is in my name and things are stable, I'll let you know once it's done. I read that sentence twice, then again, each time slower. She doesn't care about paperwork, as long as the house is in my name. My chest tightened so hard I had to put my hand flat against it. Twist 4 was not legal. It was personal. It was the realization that in conversations I never heard, he reduced me to someone small, someone foolish, someone who didn't care as long as he played the provider. That was the story he'd told about me to the one professional who could have questioned what he was doing. I sat there, surrounded by files and screens and my own quiet breathing, and felt something fundamental give way inside. This wasn't just numbers or signatures anymore, it was my entire identity, rewritten in places I had never looked. On paper, I was no longer his partner. In other people's minds, I had never really been. I didn't cry. I thought I would, sitting there with that email open, reading his words about me over and over. She doesn't care about paperwork, as long as the house is in my name and things are stable. It was such a small sentence. Ordinary, casual, the kind of thing people write every day. But it took everything I thought I was and shrank it into something stupid and soft. Someone who didn't look, didn't question, didn't matter. I closed the laptop. The house was quiet. The clock on the wall ticked like nothing had changed. The cushions on the sofa were slightly crooked from where we'd sat the night before, watching some forgettable series. His coffee mug was still in the sink, ring of brown at the bottom. It was surreal how normal everything looked with the knowledge sitting in my chest like a stone. A part of me wanted to storm into his office, to slam the printed emails in front of him and ask, "How could you?" To watch his face when he realized I knew. But another part of me, the part that grew up double-checking numbers and waiting until accounts balanced, said very clearly, "Not yet." I knew how our fights went. I knew his skill with words. How quickly he could turn something around until I was the one apologizing. If I went in now, empty-handed except for shock and hurt, I knew exactly how it would sound later. She misunderstood. She agreed, she just forgot. She's emotional. I sat there and realized something I hadn't allowed myself to say out loud before. He had spent years building a version of me that worked for him. On paper, in other people's heads. Even, slowly, in mine. If I wanted any chance of changing the story, I couldn't afford a scene. I needed facts, dates, copies, proof that didn't depend on who sounded more convincing in a room. So instead of confronting him, I did something that felt, in its own way, worse. I waited. That evening, when he came home, I watched him as if I'd never seen him properly before. The way he threw his keys into the same bowl, the way he loosened his tie with a little sigh, the way he kissed the top of my head almost absently as he walked past me, eyes on his phone. "Long day?" I asked. "Exhausting," he said, dropping onto the sofa. "Clients are being impossible. We need to think about restructuring next quarter. Too much pressure on us." Us. The word lodged in my throat. I had to swallow it down. I said. My voice sounded normal. Too normal. "We'll figure it out." He talked about numbers and deals and future plans. I nodded in the right places, made the usual comments. The whole time, I knew that on every official document, those plans were his alone. He never once looked at me like someone who knew he'd taken my name off our life. That might have been the worst part. How easy it seemed for him. Lying beside him that night, listening to his breathing steady into sleep, I stared at the ceiling and made myself a promise. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw things or threaten or beg. I was going to understand exactly what he had done, every piece of it, and then I was going to decide, calmly, what to do with that truth. Not for him, for me. The next morning, I woke up early, not to cook or tidy or answer emails, to quietly, methodically start making copies. I took my personal laptop to the kitchen table, not the one we shared for work. I opened the company portal again, the emails, the property deeds. I downloaded everything I could, printed some, saved others to a USB drive I'd bought years ago and never really used. Each click felt like a betrayal going in both directions. His, recorded, mine, beginning. I hated that feeling, that secrecy. It felt like I was becoming the kind of person I never wanted to be. But every time guilt rose in my throat, I pictured my name under former officer, the line about me wanting to focus on family, the loan document with my name on the debt and not the asset. I wasn't undermining a partnership. I was documenting the fact that it was already gone. At work, I watched more than I spoke. I noticed how often his version of things slipped into conversations without anyone questioning it. "She's not into the legal stuff," he told a new supplier one day, laughing. "If she had her way, we wouldn't even have contracts." The supplier laughed along. I felt my face go hot, but I said nothing. I just marked it in my mind. That afternoon, I went through old emails with clients, the ones who always asked for me when there was a problem, the ones who sent thank you notes addressed to both of us, or to just me, because I was the one who'd actually fixed things. I started quietly saving those too, not changing anything, just keeping a record. At night, when he fell asleep in front of the TV, I sat with my notebook, making a private timeline. When we launched, when the first big client came in, when we hired our first staff, who did what, who introduced which client, who built which system. It felt obsessive, petty even, but there was a logic to it I understood. He had his version of the story, my company, my risk, my decisions. I needed mine, not dramatic, not embellished, just what actually happened. There were moments, in those first weeks, when I almost convinced myself to stop. Like the afternoon I caught my reflection in a shop window and barely recognized myself, shoulders tense, face drawn, eyes constantly scanning, like I was waiting to be caught doing something wrong. Who was I turning into? I'd spent my whole life believing that if you treated people fairly and worked hard, things would balance out. Sitting across from a stranger in some lawyer's office, arguing over documents and dates, none of that was ever part of my picture. The first time I considered seeing a lawyer, I actually felt sick. It felt disloyal, disrespectful, like stepping outside the marriage even if I wasn't touching anyone else. I told myself I was being dramatic, that maybe there was some explanation I hadn't thought of yet. Maybe he'd say, "Yes, technically it's in my name, but you know it's ours. and point to some will or side letter I hadn't seen, so I hesitated. For days. Then something small happened that pushed me over. We were at dinner with another couple, friends of his mainly. The conversation drifted to work. They were talking about founders and partners. One of them turned to me and said, "So, you help out with his business too, right? Help out." I felt the words like a slap. Before I could answer, he chuckled and said, "She keeps things running, but this madness is all my doing. She keeps saying she'll step back when we have kids. Right?" He looked at me, smiling like it was a joke we'd rehearsed together. I stared at him for a second, at the easy way he put words in my mouth, at how naturally he spoke about me stepping back, like it was a plan we shared. I heard myself say, "Yeah, something like that." The table moved on. Laughter, another topic. No one noticed that I barely spoke after that. That night, after he fell asleep, I went into the living room with my laptop. I typed "spouse removed as director without consent" into the search bar. It was the first true line I'd drawn that he didn't know about. I read quietly for hours, articles, forums, case summaries, words like breach of trust, unjust enrichment, beneficial interest, marital assets. For the first time, I saw my situation written out in other people's stories. Different details, same pattern. Partners quietly removed from companies they helped build. Signatures collected under pressure or misrepresentation. Houses in one name, loans in two. Some people had screamed and broken things. Some had walked out with nothing. A few, the ones that made me sit up straighter, had done something else. They had stayed calm, collected documents, built timelines, and then gone to people whose job it was to translate betrayal into legal language. It still felt like crossing a line. But I was starting to realize something important. He had already crossed it. I was just deciding how to respond. When I finally booked the appointment, I did it from a new email address I created that night. Not our shared account. Not my work one. I told myself it was for privacy, but it also felt like claiming a small, separate space for myself in a life where everything else was entangled. The lawyer I saw was not dramatic. He didn't gasp or throw his pen or tell me I'd been ruined. He listened, asked precise questions, took notes. When I laid the documents out on his desk, the director resignation, the share transfer, the property deed, the loan agreement, he lined them up calmly. "Did you know what you were signing at the time?" he asked. "I knew I was signing something," I said. "I didn't know this was the result." "Did anyone explain the consequences clearly, in those terms?" "No." "Did you ever agree, verbally or in writing, that the business would belong to him alone?" I let out a short, humorless breath. "No. The whole idea was that it was ours." He nodded. "And do you have evidence of your involvement? Emails, messages, records of your role?" "Yes," I said. "A lot." He leaned back. "Legally," he said slowly, "what's done on paper is difficult to undo, but it is not necessarily the end of the story." He explained things in a language I half recognized from university, but that felt very different when applied to my life. That there was a difference between what a piece of paper said and what a court might decide was fair in a long marriage. That contributions, financial and non-financial, mattered. That misleading someone about what they were signing could, in some cases, be challenged. He didn't promise a miracle. He didn't tell me he'd fix everything. He just outlined possibilities, claims, negotiations, settlements, divorce. The word sat between us like a heavy object. "I'm not sure I want to end it," I said quietly. "Not yet." He didn't push. "You don't have to decide that today," he said. "What you can do right now is continue to gather information. Don't alert him. Don't sign anything else you don't fully understand. And start protecting yourself financially where you can." "Protect myself how?" I asked. "Small, legal steps," he said. "Separate savings, documentation of your contributions. Maybe, eventually, an official record of your concerns. You don't go on the attack. You prepare for the possibility that one day you'll need to defend your version of the truth." I walked out of his office feeling both heavier and strangely lighter. Nothing had been fixed. I wasn't suddenly safe, but for the first time since opening that portal, I had something other than pain in my hands. I had a direction. Not a plan for revenge in the dramatic sense. No fantasies of ruining him overnight or exposing him at some big event. Just a quiet, disciplined commitment. I was going to stop being the person in his emails, the one who didn't care as long as things looked stable. I cared now, and I was going to let the truth, properly documented and patiently collected, do what my anger would only mess up. At home, he was in the kitchen, talking about a potential new client. I listened, nodded, asked questions like always. If he noticed anything different in my face, he didn't show it. Later that night, after he fell asleep, I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence at the top of a fresh page. This is what actually happened. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like the beginning of something inevitable. The truth didn't come out in one scene. It leaked, quietly, precisely, in ways he couldn't control with charm or volume. For a few months, life looked almost the same from the outside. We still went to work together, still came home, ate dinner, watched shows, but under the surface, everything had shifted. I moved my salary to a new personal account the lawyer helped me open. I reduced what I spent from the joint one. I stopped signing anything at work unless I'd read every word twice, and sometimes forwarded it to my lawyer with a simple, "Can you look at this?" I didn't tell him I'd seen a lawyer. I didn't tell him what I knew. I just stopped being the person who nodded and signed. The opening he gave me came sooner than I expected. He walked in one evening, excited. "If this new contract closes," he said, "we'll need to expand. Bigger space, more staff. The bank's ready to extend our credit line. They'll need you to sign as co-borrower again, but it's the usual stuff." The usual stuff was how I'd lost everything on paper. "Let's go together," I said. "I want the bank manager to explain the documents this time, properly." He frowned. "You know how busy they are. It's easier if I just bring the forms home." I held his gaze. "If they want my signature, they can give me 30 minutes. He shrugged, annoyed, but not enough to fight over. "Fine, we'll set it up." At the bank, the manager greeted him by name, me as ma'am. We sat in a glass office. A stack of papers appeared between us. "As discussed," the manager said, "we'll secure the increased facility against your existing property and business cash flows. Both borrowers will." "Before we start," I said, keeping my voice steady, "can I clarify something? Am I registered as an owner of the property we used as security?" The manager glanced at the screen. "No, ma'am, you're a co-borrower, not on the title. The flat is solely in Mr. A's name." "And with the company," I said, "am I still a director or just an employee?" He hesitated. "According to the latest documents, only your husband is director and shareholder. You're listed as operations manager." I nodded. "So, to be clear, you'd like me to personally guarantee more debt for assets and a business that, on paper, I don't own at all." The room went very quiet. The manager looked at him, then at me, then back at the screen. "That's one way to put it," he said carefully. My husband shifted in his chair. "We've discussed all this at home," he said quickly. "She's always been supportive. This is just a formality." I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the manager. "I need independent advice before I agree to anything else," I said. "I also need to formally record that I was not aware I'd been removed as director and owner when the previous changes were made." There was no scene. No raised voices, just silence, then the tiny sound of the manager's pen being set down. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we should pause this application until everything is clear between you." He printed nothing. No forms came home with us. Within a week, the bank had temporarily suspended our increased facility pending further information. That was the first place his version of reality stopped working. Not because I'd accused him of anything, just because I'd said calmly, "Explain this to me on record." The accountant was next. The bank's questions reached him. He called my husband, then, surprisingly, he called me. "Just to confirm," he said, his voice careful, "you were aware of your resignation and share transfer at the time, correct?" "No," I said. "I wasn't. And I have a lawyer now. Please put any questions in writing to him." There was a long pause on the line. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. "Understood," he said. "I'll do that." I forwarded the call summary to my lawyer. A week later, he showed me a reply from the accountant, pages of cautious language, attaching the old email thread where my husband had written, "She's fully aware," and "This is her decision." "Useful," my lawyer said simply. "He'll protect himself. That means he can't protect your husband's story quite as easily." The lies started to look less like explanations and more like risk. At work, the first real crack in his reputation came from something very small. I resigned. Not in a dramatic speech. I wrote a measured, polite email to the staff, copied to our general inbox. After many years with the company, including being there at its founding and early growth, I've decided to step away from operations. I'm grateful for the relationships and trust we've built. Due to ongoing legal and personal matters related to my role and ownership status, I'm unable to continue in my position. I thanked specific people, mentioned projects I'd led. Nothing exaggerated, just accurate. Then I clicked send. Within an hour, I started getting replies. Shocked, warm, confused. "I didn't know you weren't an owner. You did so much more than operations. What's going on?" I didn't badmouth him. I just answered, when pressed, with one line. "I found out recently that I'd been removed as director and owner without my informed consent. I'm addressing it legally." That was all it took. The staff compared that with what they'd heard for years, that I wanted to step back, that I didn't care about paperwork. The dissonance did the rest. People talk, quietly, in corridors and over lunches. A few key clients reached out too. "We always thought you were co-founder," one said on the phone. "Is that not correct?" "It was," I said, "until the documents said otherwise." I didn't need to add much more. His reputation had been built on the image of the decisive, visionary founder with the supportive spouse in the background. Once people saw the actual documents, that story didn't sit as comfortably. The facts were simple. The pattern was clear. And slowly, neatly, in banks and inboxes and quiet conversations, the version of reality he'd built began to unravel.